So welcome to this first workshop on setting up a successful monitoring campaign. In the workshop today, we want to drive you through the planning of the monitoring campaign, and I have with me my colleagues from the City Ops project. I'm Nuria Castell. I have with me Hester, Oscar, and David. So you have been participating now in the last 2 years in the City Ops project. And as you might be aware, like the challenge that we try to face is that there are urban challenges in our cities, and policies and decision makers are trying to solve them. But citizen scientists are collecting already data. We are already collecting many data, but this data is seldomly being used by policymakers. So we want to make this bridge where the data that we are collecting can serve for policy decisions. In the project, we work with this participation wheel, where we truly believe that citizens are part of the solutions, and we are part of the solutions in every stage of this solving problem. So from collecting data to also generating knowledge, aggregating the data, creating visualizations that can help policy, but also through citizen and community-led actions to protect the environment. So not only through policy decisions, but also through our own actions. This is a very busy slide. I will just wanted to remember that City Ops, we focus on both dimensions, the social dimensions of this inclusive stakeholder participation, creating relations with the different stakeholders. They can be NGOs or can be authorities, but also the technical dimensions of having the sensors, data quality, data integration, etc. So we believe both dimensions are equally important when setting up monitoring campaigns. You were the ones joining us through our first phase. So from the very beginning of the project, you were engaged with us. And you might know that now in the second phase, in this starting of the third year of the project, we have also started onboarding 30 alliance cases through Europe that will be also working together with us. So through this third year, it will be 35 cases in Europe, 35 citizen observatories working together in City Ops. And in the third phase, will be next year, we will also engage with 50 fellow cases. So the agenda for today is why do we need an environmental monitoring toolkit? Why we have used our resources and worked together with you in creating this toolkit. So we have designed this in 2 workshops. First workshop on setting up the scene, and the second workshop will be on the data management, the validation, visualization of the data. So the first part of this of today will be presentations from myself and my colleagues, and the second part of the workshop will be a little bit more hands-on work. We will be doing a fictional planning of a monitoring campaign, and that will help us to better understand if how the monitoring toolkit is enhancing and helping you to plan monitoring campaigns, and how we can improve it, as you are very wise and very experienced in setting up your own monitoring campaigns. So let's convey all this common knowledge that we all have. So why an environmental monitoring toolkit? And I'm going to start saying that an environmental monitoring toolkit was designed to lower the barriers for the technological use of data. So from helping everyone that is maybe not so technological savvy to choose a right sensor, to get what's set up the objective, say which monitoring variables do I need to consider to answer my questions. So setting up all that technological aspects and technical aspects. But if we want to have a successful monitoring campaign, technology alone, it's not enough. So we do have other three toolkits in the City Ops that some of you are already aware of them. And we will also have other mentoring sessions. So in the session today, we will only go to the Environmental Monitoring Toolkit, how to set up the technological tools, how to make the right decisions when setting the technological aspects. But there are other aspects, the social aspects, that shall not be forgotten. So we have now designed this environmental monitoring toolkit. We will also send you the link to this. It's already openly available, but still is not finished and will never be finished. It's always an ongoing task. And when you enter into this link, you will see a navigation menu that goes to the different sections that are already generated in the toolkit. You also have access to a search engine if you want to look for something in concrete, and you can search for it. You can also give us your own feedback if this was helpful, and I will go a little bit more through this feedback. And here you have on the first page, you also have the different sections that are part of this toolkit, and you can jump right in them. When you just jump in them, you go then to the second part where you see the different entries and questions in each of the sections, and then you can click on them. And when you click on them, you always will have this structure. The structure is a question, for example, what to consider before conducting environmental monitoring. And then it has a little bit of a description of what you will find there. Why is this relevant and you should be considering this? Then some guidance on how can this be done. Then some resources, also links to other sections within this toolkit that are important, or you might be interested when you are looking for this particular question, and also like this navigation menu. So you have different navigation menus, like you can come back to other sections from the left side, and also navigate within the question from the right side. Again, you have the search engine access. And I just want to really be looking at these blue sides on where is your contribution. So you will see here there's this edit on GitHub. This is because we don't want this toolkit to be one directional. We want to be bidirectional because we are working together with you, as you have lots of experiences or you have your own experiences. So you might also add here useful resources that maybe you have generated within your projects or you have been using within your projects. Or you might also add another question that you think it's important to have that and we didn't thought about them. So this contribution is always open, and just don't be afraid to use it. Also, you can edit directly on GitHub, and then we can review and approve. So it appears in the toolkit and is accessible for everyone. But also, if you are not so good on GitHub, or you can also send us an email, and we will make sure that your contributions are also considered in the toolkit. So that's what I wanted to say here. And with that, I would like to give the voice to my colleagues, starting by Hester, who will drive us a little bit through what is in our toolkit.
Yes, thank you, Nuria. So I take it from here. It's about if you start with a measurement project, then consciously or unconsciously, you have asked yourself a number of questions, and we try to put some method behind these questions, and we would love to hear your input in how it went for you, and how did you come from your concerns to the right questions. So next slide. So as most of the time people start with something they are worried about or interested in, but to go from something you're worried about to the right research question on how to solve to solve this issue that you're interested in, or in what you want to reach, that brings along a lot of different questions. Also about who you should be involving, and the most difficult question perhaps of all is, once you have the measurements, what are you going to do with the measurements? So how are you going to have impact? And that is why we have made in the toolkit a special issue about what you should consider before you start measuring. And perhaps you have already started measuring and then realized that you should have thought about these things. So it's in many cases. This goes with kind of like with a feedback loop. So you are starting measuring and you think, oh, perhaps I should have involved other people. So, but we would love to have your input on how this part of the project went for you. Did you? What were the things that you considered before you started to measure? So next one. Oh, one before. So to ask the right question, that is actually a very, very difficult thing, because you could be worried about something, for example, wood burning in the neighborhood, or traffic, lots of traffic, and you could be worried about that, and it could be like, how high are the concentrations here, what are the main sources, all these kind of questions determine then again on what it should be that you are measuring, and what is the most what is the best decision here. And that is not the only question, so the component, what in the air quality is it that I'm worried about, but then you should also make decision about where am I going to measure. So making a measurement plan, and how often should the measurements be conducted. Is once a month enough? Should I measure every minute? So what is the source I want to get my yeah to find out that is contributing to the problem? Are there other sources that I should take into account? And what kind of sensing device is it that is useful for these kind of questions? So, and this is actually a very intricate line of decisions that you have to make. So in the toolkit, we try to give you some help in going through all these decisions. So next one. And what you also are probably running into is who is who in air quality monitoring. What is already there? Is there already data? Is there already information? And also, who is responsible, for example, for the air quality? Who do you want to inform? Who can help you, or who would be a good one to inform about, so that you can increase your impact. So we also made a page about that, and it would be great again to have your input and tell us what worked really well in your project. Okay. Yeah, so to this all was a little bit abstract. It's on a high level. So I would like to give you one example. This was from a guy you see here, the grumpy guy behind the window. He has problems with smokers outside the cafe. If the cafe closes at midnight, this people go outside, they stand there and they smoke. And this caused him lots of smoke inside the house, and he wanted to get attention to this problem. So, what were the decisions he had to make? He had to make the decision to find a sensor that could actually pick up the smoke. And he picked a PM2.5 sensor. And he realized that just to measure the peaks at his house was not enough. You also need measurements in other places to show off how high the peaks are in your place. So what you can see here that he could, because there were other sensors in the neighborhood, you can see in the graph, you can see that most of the times these sensors did exactly the same behavior, except on Friday nights, it has a peak in the Saturday morning, and on Saturday nights. So in the weekend, he saw huge peaks at his place that were not there in the other measurements in the same town. So all the time the measurements were exactly the same, except in the weekends, and that is how he could demonstrate that the problem he was facing was really from the smokers. And because he could demonstrate this contrast, he could also, and because he had chosen a measurement that is also used for official measurements, he could go to the public health service and ask them, hey, what do you think about that? And they were like, oh, wow, these are really high concentrations. This is not good. And with these results, he could go to the municipality, and they are now discussing to find a solution. So just to give you an example of the kind of decisions you have to make to get through to a proper result. And to be honest, this was not the first experiment this guy had been doing to demonstrate the smoke problem. He had also had a small company measuring ultrafines in his house, and these also getting very high measures, so very high results. But for some reason, the Public Health Service was not so impressed because there are not official numbers or norms for the ultrafines. And it really helped to give the context of the neighborhood who did not have the high values, but he did. So these are the kind of things that help you get impact. And just to give you an example of how important it is to have a nice plan when you start doing a measurement campaign. It's not just about picking the right sensor. And I'd like to stop here because I want to give my colleagues time enough.
Thank you, Hester. So we have Oscar from IA talking about the sensing devices and the sensor data infrastructure.
Hi. Well, nice to see you all. My name is Oscar, and I am now in Sweden, but I work in Barcelona. And yeah, I'm going to talk about sensing devices and the sensor data infrastructure, or basically how can we collect data with picking sensors and also picking the right platforms so that the data is stored somewhere. So let's start by talking about what is a sensing device. So we often refer this as simply sensors or low-cost sensors or sensor nodes, devices, sensor boxes. There's many names, but basically what we're talking about here is it's a technical tool that is able to measure physical properties or parameters in the air and environmental conditions. The idea here is that we have a small device that has a range of features that we're going to talk about in a second. But if you want to look at it, if you click next, there's also some information here in the toolkit itself. So what are the components? The main items are, well, of course, it needs to have some sensors. There is either air pollution, weather sensors. It has to have some electronics maybe to collect the data and send it somewhere, probably to via Wi-Fi or store it on an SD card. And maybe sometimes it will have a display, or it would have sometimes also an SD card storage and other features. But of course, if you are talking about a sensor, it very likely has power, either by forms of a battery or it's solar powered or with USB. These are very tiny devices generally, so they do not consume much, but they do have some requirements. If you click next, it's not that all these components, of course, have to be present. There's big sensors, small sensors. There's many kinds. Some of them are more DIY. Some of them are more out-of-the-box plug-and-play approach. But next, the approach is that typically you have at least an air pollution sensor and sometimes weather variables, and many other devices can include, of course, much more complex setups. No? So if we look at the next slide, you have here one example of the project that we coordinate here from Barcelona. And here you see the main items. No? You see a typical USB plug and a cable, an SD card, and in white you see some electronics, maybe a sensor, a couple of cables, and in yellow you see that battery. And next slide. If we look at the components, for instance, in this very particular case, in the center, next, you see a data logger. So this is basically the electronics or the brain that takes care of the measurements and sends data over to a data platform. And then on the left and on the right side, you see some sensors. And of course, many devices are much more complex. They have many things, and this doesn't look maybe that scary, but of course some of them have different configurations and more bulky, with more cables and so on. Next slide. On here you see how can it look already set up. So it could look like this. This is an example, and you already see some familiar components like maybe a protection box, you see some plugs, you see some openings for the sensors to start interacting with air and drawing air inside and take it and analyze it. And then inside of that, there is the electronics that I just showed. And in the next slide, you see here, you see them in other flavors and sizes. Some of them have maybe this look more of like a traditional electric box with gray plastic. Some of them are fancier with colors, but typically they have this shape and size, maybe a little bit smaller, maybe a little bit bigger. And here they are located in a test in Barcelona to see how they perform in comparison with more advanced equipment. So now let's move on how to choose one sensor device. And there's a lot of factors that to take into account. It's not an easy task. And in the toolkit, we have tried to put together some recommendations. We start with some technical aspects. At the end, we're choosing a device. So we have to consider some particular characteristics, mostly concerning data, maybe power, how robust it is it ready to deploy, or do I have to put it together myself? What type of pollutants does it measure? Are they fit for purpose? Does it have data logging internally, or does it send the data over a protocol that is available in my region or not? And in the other hand, there is also non-technical aspects, and these are more probably even more important. For instance, not only in terms of cost, but whether or not it's easy to use. Does it have a data policy attached? Is it a black box and I cannot use it after a while and I don't know how to fix it? Does it have support and documentation? What are the licenses? And more importantly, even for the environmental impact, is it recyclable? Can I repair it? And is it a fair project that it has, let's say, is looking into making a lot of money, or is it looking to help people and have an impact on the communities in a positive sense? So all of these aspects, in a way, they have an impact on our decision, and we have prepared in the toolkit some guidelines, and we'll be really happy to hear from you on what your opinions are, especially to consider all the variety of situations that can be out there. Moving on to the data platform, now we know, well, we see that the data has to go somewhere, right? We either can store it on an SD card and have it on a CSV file or an Excel file and just keep it on our computer. But many devices, they send data to what we call a data platform, a server somewhere that stores the data. Maybe they do some process and they have a database where they store all the information and then expose it to people for people to use it. Sometimes this will be free of charge. Sometimes it will be an open API, so the data is freely accessible. And sometimes not. Sometimes you have to pay, or there might be licenses that apply. But typically, you will have a way to access the data and visualize it. So in the next slide, you see one example from the Netherlands. This is the Samen Meten platform that RIVM maintains and develops, and this is a sensor data platform that have contributions for many citizen science initiatives. And you see typically a dashboard like this where you have the possibility to click on the different dots, maybe see hotspots already, some data from different parameters. And finally, in another case, for instance, in the next slide, a different approach where you see, in this case in Oslo, from the Smart Citizen platform, you see some data below and some dots in the map referring to the number of devices that are in the city of Oslo at the moment. So again, some very brief considerations on the next slide on how to choose the data platform, and if you can actually choose the data platform, because in many cases the data platform will be directly linked to the device that you pick, and it goes hand to hand. Sometimes you do not have a choice, and sometimes you do have a choice, but it all depends on a series of factors that are sometimes tied together with the device. So it's worth spending some time not only looking at the aspects that I mentioned above for the device itself, but also on the platform that comes attached to it, so that you don't have, let's say, surprises, or either good or bad, and for the data platform itself. And here, probably non-technical aspects are quite important. The data tends to be easier to use and access as long as you have access to it with different tools. There's a lot of software that you can use either offline or in other services. But here, accessing the data is quite important, and whether or not there is fair data principles, if it's secure, if it's private, if it's compliant with regulation, if you actually own it, and if it's long-term available for you to access it. And finally, talking not only about how fair it is, but also in terms of care. So whether or not it has collective benefits, you have authority to control it, is responsible and ethical. It's a set of principles that you might also want to check. And here in the toolkit, again, we put together some recommendations for that aspect. And I now leave the word to my colleague as well on the next aspects.
Thank you, Oscar. So, David, please.
Yeah, hello. So I'm David. I'm from a French SME based in France, and let's say I'm like the wearable guy of the team. So I will be mainly talk about let's say non-traditional, not just the static sensing devices, but also the other, as Oscar said, there are different tastes and flavors. So we'll go to the other flavors and not the traditional one we are most used, to talk about. So on the next slide, as we can see, we have of course the devices, the static we are the most used to. So as Oscar said, they can come with any, this one for example is LoRa with solar power, so you have many options for this one. But of course they are super good, we'll see, for some cases. But in some other cases, mobile like this one can be also an option. So typically this one has on board a GPS. It can measure PM, three gases, but it will also measure vibration and noise. So it also brings another way of seeing air pollution on the territory. And the third option, of course, is the wearable. I hope we'll have a chance to talk about that later when we'll be in the second part of the presentation, to get your feedback of, have you played with that tool, those kind of tools, and what are the limitations you may have had. But it's like the third option. Of course, there are many others like satellite imageries and stuff like that. But when we're talking about sensing out there on the field, it's again static, mobile, and wearables. So there are mainly on the next slide, we're going to see the different options. In what case a sensor will be the most suited. Typically, if you want to monitor air pollution at an intersection and see the impact of traffic, of course, there are many chances you will go for a static device because it will offer a point of view with the long time series so you can see what happens in a fixed location. However, if you want to identify hotspots, because at some point that could be interesting. I have a territory. I don't know where the pollution is coming from. Am I going to put hundreds and thousands of static devices? Or maybe it would be a good option to have a few mobile ones that are going to roam on the territory, collecting data in real time in every location of the territory without modeling. I could actually sense and measure in almost any location on my territory. That could be a good option. And of course, in that case, you would rather go for a mobile device, whether you could put it on the postal office vehicles, on a tram, on partners, on the fleet of the municipality. There are many options where you could deploy them. And then on the third question, when it comes to, I want to see as a person, what's the air I breathe? We all know that we spend more than 80% of our time indoor. Even the high-end air quality monitoring station is useless if I want to do this. So 80% of the time, those high-end equipments are blind when we want to evaluate what the air we actually breathe every day. So wearables, even though they are not as accurate, are a super good option because you can have the global view of indoor and outdoor and your everyday exposure through all your activities. And then you could also more efficiently assess the impact of your changes in your behaviors and say, oh, I just opened the windows. I just sort of, reduced by 50% my daily exposure to PM just because I opened the window for 5 minutes. So again, wearables is also a good option, but I will get back to what Esther said. It all depends on the purpose. And first, setting up the purpose is like the most important part because it's like the foundation of the whole project. And then, of course, you will see you can combine multiple sensors, but the why and the purpose is the most important things. So on the next slide, we're going to see what the positive and the negative parts of each sensor. Of course, a static sensor, often you will have a more qualitative. You can have high-end sensors doing, getting some accurate data, and they're super good to monitor in time. However, in space, if you want to have a large coverage, you're gonna have to have, well, like tens, hundreds of those air quality monitoring stations because they can't cover the territory. Or you can do some modeling, but then you end up in a whole different story because it requires other expertise. On the mobile, of course, it's great if you want to monitor in space. However, well, what if the car goes at the same day at 8 a.m. and the day after at 9 a.m.? Of course, maybe if you go in front of the school, parents will drop off their kids at 8 or 8:30, whatever. So you may have a peak, and afterwards nobody's there. So you don't have the same consistency in time. It's hard to compare, different values collected at different times, even though they're on the same place. So that's where it gets tricky. But and also, what if it just rained the day before, or it's there's smoke, whatever? It's hard to identify the source of the pollution when you have a peak on the map, because the thing has been moving. You don't know what's around. It's a non-consistent environment. So as environment changes, many parameters change, so it gets complicated to analyze data. And for wearables, it's magic. I mean, you can get the indoor and outdoor, but it's even worse because that context changes it could change like every minute. You could be smoking in your car and a person next to you, like 1 meter away, would be outside of the car with the same wearable. You could not mix the data because they don't tell the same story. So there's that saying I really like that says, data without context is noise. And with wearables, trust me, you collect a lot of noise. So there's as you will see, it's pointed out. Yeah, we talk about this in the toolkit. It's the importance of collecting data with the context. Otherwise, it's super hard to interpret the data. So it's super rich, but at the same time, it's hard to exploit if you don't collect that information. So on the next slide, we'll see that that's the typical, as Oscar presented, that's the typical output of static stations you could get. Points, charts in time, and that's super valuable for some use cases. But of course, if you want to have a global coverage of your territory, you will have to multiply this by, by the tens if you want to have a global coverage. On the next one, it's typically the kind of map you get from 1, 2, or 3 vehicles. So it's interesting because you get like a global coverage, but how do I exploit that data? What's the insight I can get out of this? And again, it depends on what you're trying to study. Is it, do you want, have a tag on the specific neighborhood and stuff like that? So it's, again, depending on what you are trying to do. On the next slide, it's a video just to see what you can do with mobile. So if you can go like halfway through the video, it shows what you can get if you combine multiple sources of information. Typically, in that case, it's a mobile sensor on top of the vehicles with a camera. And the idea is here, as you can see, you can actually see in the video the source of the pollution. So the pollution is not attached to that specific place. It's the guys with the blowers on the side of the road blowing leaves. Of course, it generates pollution. Does it mean that that spot is polluted? No, it means that there is an activity that triggers pollution. So again, it's a total different approach of what you want to monitor. And on the next slide, it's just also a way of showing how you can exploit the data with wearables when you provide context. Typically, this is personal exposure in the subway, depending on whether you're in the car or on the platform, if you're on that station or the other. So when you provide context, you can really get super insightful data with those wearables. And on the final slide, the idea is, hey, maybe you could combine all those sources of information, of course, because some are good in time, others are good in space. So it will be a super good idea to put them together. So yes, it's a good idea to have multiple tools, but I think at the same time, it's not a good idea because they don't tell the same story. If you press, because we're going to mix data that makes no sense coming together. Because if one person has been monitoring indoor, the other one outdoor, and the other one mobile, it's not because they are close by on a map that they tell the same story. So that's my final conclusion. It's, of course, we can combine those technology, yes, but we have to make sure that you are having, that's the final push, Noria. Thank you. It's, yes, we can combine those different sources of information, but only if you use data collection protocols, just to make sure that if I use a mobile and there's a static, we just make sure that we use the sensors in the same conditions just to make sure they tell the same story. And the final thing is that when you're doing this, make sure you don't mix the data because they don't tell the same thing, mix knowledge. So that means that process data, get that information, that knowledge of the data, and then you can combine the result of those information and bring them together in order to tell the story you want to tell. So again, the why is super important. What's your purpose? And once you have clearly identified your purpose, then the rest of the questions should be a lot easier. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all the presenters of the toolkit.